Welcome back to Wargaming Luke, and today we're going to be taking a look through the new Firefight Rulebook that you can either buy separately from Mantic or you can of course get as part of the new 2-player starter set. Thanks to Mantic for sending us a copy of the new 2-player starter set. We're going to be having lots going on with the game as well as our videos that we've already done. You can check out the unboxing of the 2-player starter set. But let's crack open the rulebook and start to take a look, shall we? A quick special thank you to our sponsors, Board in Brum. You can shop over there for all your wargaming needs, from Games Workshop to Atomic Mass Games and many other companies. And look into their events that they have on pretty much every weekend. Thanks to those guys, and you can go and check out the link to their store in the description below this video. So you've got the contents page straight off the bat there. Down the middle, so you've got introduction, what you need to play, models and units, the rules, rounds and turns, command points, orders, line of sight, types of terrain, actions, movement, ranged attacks, assault, pinning, nerve, tests of course, buildings, vehicles, keywords, missions. That's broken down into battle missions and narrative missions, and Warpath universe backgrounds. There you go. And then you've got credits for your rules development team, photography, art, all that sort of stuff. So shout out to all of those guys. Got a little bit of an explanation here on the inside page about what you're getting into here narrative wise. I'm going to read this first paragraph to you guys just to break it down, but I've done a video already that included a bit of a breakdown about what this universe is all about. But over the centuries, humanity has spread inexplorably into the far reaches of space. Since the creation of the Galactic Co-Prosperity Sphere, or the GCPS, humanity's touch has never been felt so keenly and by so many. The sphere now encompasses myriad planets and hundreds, if not thousands, of different species. Some join the sphere willingly, while others represent the GCPS and bide their time, waiting for humanity to fall or prepare to take their own revenge. Memories of old Earth are but a shadow lost in a haze of light speed and technological advancement. Now there are only two things that drive humanity: progress and profit. And so this is a universe collapsed into war, such as the likes of Warhammer 40,000, but it's nowhere near as grimdark. It's more political, all based upon this GCPS. Humanity basically getting too greedy and picking fights with part species around the universe. Some willing to communicate and become allies. Some willing to wage war, and others just wanting to look to cause chaos, such as the plague. But there is a faction book separate to this as well, the faction lists book. If you guys wish us to take a look at that as well, please do leave comments down below and we'll have a read through that as well. Otherwise, this book doesn't cover all the separate species and their individual rules. That's in the faction lists book, but this does have a ton of narrative background in it, which we'll just flick through now. This here is the 2-player starter set, by the way, if you don't yet know. So what you need to play the game, nice and simple start. Obviously your forces to play the game, very simple, which is otherwise known as a strike force. Once you've built your list, command dice, you get these in the starter set. You roll these basically to determine how many command points you get to use. Is if you want to kind of compare it to your Warhammer 40,000, that sort of thing. The game uses a D8 system, so you get a number of D8s per person. It also has a little table here in case you need to roll a D4 or a D2 so that you can break down what the thing is. So you can roll a D8 compared to this table, and then if you want to turn the result into a D4 result, so if you roll a 7 to 8 here, it's actually a 4, for example. So there you go, nice and simple. Modifiers are very similar to most games in this. You can bundle together multipliers, so they're actually whether you're adding or subtracting from a number, and you can't go lower than 1. 1 is always a fail in this game, whereas an 8 is always a critical hit, so you always succeed, essentially. There may also be situations in this game where you have to reach higher than an 8, such as a 9. If this is the case, you have to roll half the number of dice that you have to roll. So for example, if you have to roll 6 dice for an attack, you roll 3 instead if you need to reach a 9, and then all you need to do is get a critical hit on an 8 to achieve that higher number, because an 8 is always a success. But because it's higher than the normal kind of range that you have to get to, they basically give you a negative to your dice to make it even harder. Rerolls are pretty standard like most other games. You get to just reroll a die, but you can't reroll a reroll. Game sizes, usually guys, if you're playing 500 to 1,250 points, you play on a 48 by 48 inch board, which is 4 by 4 foot board. And then there's a 72-inch by 48-inch table for larger games of 1500 points or more per player. Nice and simple. Measuring, you can pre-measure. Always measure from base to base. Nice and simple. You don't measure from weapons when shooting and things. It's just base to base, which keeps it nice and simple. This game tends to take a lot from the likes of Star Wars Legion that they kind of issued into miniature gaming and wargaming, where you measure a lot of stuff from your leader, and it's from your leader's perspective because you have a leader for each unit in your kind of list, if you like, or in your army. Tokens count as markers, pretty standard. No need to explain that. So models and units. So this is kind of your normal stat lines on your guys. So leader model, we've just talked about that. You have one on each unit generally, but a unit pride profile, guys, we'll just go through this very quickly. You got the unit type. So obviously you got a troop here for the Steel Warriors. You got speed for SP, and 6 is the first movement amount, and 12 is like your run speed, if you like. And this is all measured in inches, of course. Shoot stat 4+ there. You've got assault, which is for combat stat, essentially. You've got your armor stat line there, so that's 6+ for them. You've got health points, so that's how many points before you go down of damage you take. Any is nerve test stat line there, so that's 4+ for them. And then you've got height, because everything's works around height for terrain and line of sight in this game. Base size, that's important as well, in case you're using like miniatures agnostic and you don't want to use their models for any reason. And then you have US, which is unit strength. This strength of will of a unit to control an objective, basically. So like if some units might have each individual model classed as a US of 2 instead of 1. So it's an interesting one. And then 100 points for the unit, and it will basically include here what comes as basic, and then you can add in 0 to 5 additional Steel Warriors for plus 18 points each. But that here is what you kind of get straight away in the unit, or what you can actually take. You then have 0 to 2 Steel Warriors may each replace their weapons with each of the following, essentially. So these are like your special weapons, right? And then the leader may replace its weapons with any of the following for free. So you can kind of customize your leader in that kind of unit, if you like. So lots of cool choices there. This tells you what your base size should be for certain size models. And that's pretty much it, really. Nice look. There's really nice art, by the way, guys, throughout this book, it must be said. I do like the artwork that they've put in here. Rules, pretty easy stuff to figure out there. I don't think we really need to go through any of that, but you can take a look. In play, this is just saying that some things that count as being in transport or reserves are not necessarily counting as being in play. Rounds and turns, and this is your game sequence, so your turn order, if you like, and what you have to kind of go through. Like most games, you have a round, and turns are alternating, guys. So you activate a unit, then your opponent does, you activate one, etc. And we'll go through that a bit more later. You go through setup, deployment, the rounds, which includes generating the command pool, which are those command dice we were talking about earlier. Take alternating turns, activating units, and then there's the end phase, and then you determine your winner. Very simple. Who goes first? A recon roll must be used. That we go more into detail about that later to determine which player has the initiative. I believe that uses the command dice, and then you always begin a round by rolling command dice then to actually determine how many command points your team has for that round. Taking turns, we've already been through that, and then the end phase, we will go through more later because it goes into more detail later on than it does there, so we'll skip past that. Command points. So this is what we run about here, where you generate them. So it says here, generating the command pool. At the start of each round, both players create their command dice pool by taking 3 black command dice, adding additional dice of the appropriate color, black, orange, or green, as shown on a unit's profile. So some of your units will say that you can add in more dice. If you played Kings of War, those sort of games, Vanguard, they all use a similar system, and I think it works quite nicely. Commanders and things may add in additional coloured dice, like stronger dice, that can give you more chance of getting more command points. More or less all you kind of need to see there. Command points are separate to orders, by the way, guys. That's probably worth pointing out as well. and whatever you roll, you get that number on your dice, essentially. And you can't save them for future rounds. You use all of your command points in that round, and that's it, pretty much. Standard uses of command points. Following options are available to both players during a round by spending command points from their pool. These are not orders, as we've just discussed. So there's two different command points, kind of powers you can use, generic, but obviously you've got also faction-specific command orders that you can use, which are in the faction lists book. So if you're playing as the Marauders, kind of like the Orc faction, they'll have 3 or 4 of their own command tactics that they can use. And this isn't like 40k where you have hundreds to choose from and it gets really confusing. It keeps it nice and simple in here and in the faction list book, and they may add up more on in the future, but it's nowhere near as cluttered as 40k, so I think that works nicely. First one is extra activation. You spend a command point after you've activated a unit. You get to then have a second turn, and then it goes to your opponent's turn. So you get to dual activate a unit, basically. So you activate a unit, they do 2 actions, and then you can then chain activate, is the word I was looking for, into another unit. And then it goes to your opponent's turn. This can be really handy. You could activate a transport unit, drop off and move up the table and shoot, and then you could drop, you could chain activate with a command point and drop out a unit in the tank, or you could charge them out of the tank or something. Really kind of nice, smooth combination. I really like the fact that it always keeps somebody involved with the game when you're going, you go, I go, you go, I go, but then you have this ability to mix it up if you want to. And the timing of this is really tactical, I think, and I'm really looking forward to trying it out. Unpin. In the end phase, you can remove pin markers from units. You can get pinned down in combat, or if you get shot by something with the pin special rule. These things can affect your unit then throughout the game, but in the end phase you have the choice to spend command points to remove them from units, which I think is really cool. Orders are special commands that are paid for using command points. A unit may benefit from a single order per activation, including orders with a persistent effect, such as some command orders. If a unit could be affected from multiple orders, it must choose which to benefit from before any actions are made or dice are rolled. And all must be declared before you roll dice. Commanders generally give out these orders. Faction orders are specific to the strike force as a whole and represent the capabilities of that faction or species rather than those of individual commanders or officers. So these might well be the things actually that are specific to your faction on their actual stat line as well. So like your specific commander might have an actual order that he can use that others can't, kind of thing, which is pretty neat. Some faction orders can also be boosted by spending additional command points to make them even stronger. The number in brackets after the order name is the cost in command points to use that order, and then it'll have a separate section that tells you can then spend this much if you want to then add this on as well, so you boost it. Faction orders can be given out to friendly units within 12 inches. This might be boosted by other things, I suppose, like special rules. Command orders. Command models in Firefight have their own unique special rules to represent their impressive tactical decision making on the battlefield. Like all orders, these command orders also require command points to use them. A single command order may be used during a command unit's activation if it is not pinned. The order may be used before or after, but not during an action. Command orders will have either aura or instant effects. So, interesting, I suppose. Auras last until the end of the round and will provide a benefit to all friendly units within X number of inches. Instant effects are resolved immediately when the command points are spent and have no ongoing effect, which completely makes sense. You have another example there. So that's orders. Going on to line of sight and partially blocked line of sight. This can be a little confusing with this game, I think, but once you get the idea of it, it is much simpler than a lot of other games, I'd say. It's more just kind of understanding the leader aspect of it. So everything's always measured from your leader. You can see in these examples here that the leader model is in the middle, and he's got line of sight from either side of his base. Of course, you always measure from the leader's base there for ranges and everything. And line of sight, you've got woodland and building on either side. Woodland is height 5 and the building is height 4, but because he has a view between the two, he can see at least 50% of the models in the opposing unit, so therefore he has clear line of sight to them, essentially. In this case here, let's go down here, should I say, actually. So in this scenario here, there's a height 4 building. The leader can't have line of sight to the unit behind it because they're only height 2 models, and the unit behind the building are height 2, but the building is height 4. It's too tall for them to see through, so nothing can be seen there. 50% of single models rule is stated here. So when a rule calls 50% of a unit or more to trigger a condition, this means that for a single model, units on 60mm bases or larger determine 50% of the model using the center of the base. For smaller base models, consider the whole base, i.e. the whole base or not at all. And for models with no base, such as vehicles, use the center of the model's base as a reference point. So there you go. And that's all you need to know for line of sight, really. In this case here, where they're on top of the hill, looking down over the height 1 rocks, both units are height 2. The blue unit is on a hill height 3 for a combined height of 5, so you do combine the height. The blue leader can draw an unobstructed line to all bases of the unit's models because it is at least 3 levels larger than the intervening rocks, so they don't get cover either there. Whereas if they were not on the height 3 hill, the height 1 rocks would partially block line of sight to the opposing unit, such as in this example over here. It says about partial blocked line of sight. You can see the unit there behind the wall, but because both units are height 2 and the wall is height 1, it's covering half of the opposing unit, and so they're partially blocked line of sight, and therefore they would get the cover special rule, which is usually just -1 to your shooting, as far as I can remember. Also, when you're talking about stuff like woodland, we'll just go through the examples here. So more than 50%, but not all of the enemy units' models' bases are in a position that would be considered blocked. At least some models can be seen. More than 50% of the enemy units' models' bases are in position behind terrain, such as an obstacle or another unit. So other units do block line of sight, but the models have a greater height than the intervening feature, so the height comes into it again there as well. The enemy unit's leader and at least 50% of its models are within an area of difficult terrain that is of a lower height that it is, regardless of how deep into the terrain they are. So there you go. The enemy unit's leader and at least 50% of its models are 3 inches or less within the boundary of difficult terrain or equal or greater height. So there you go. Nice, I like it. I think it keeps the rules fairly simple enough to understand it, but also enough depth to kind of cover every base for the most. And I understand that really. So, and then it says here, height 0 structures such as a flat pond do not obstruct for any cover or anything like that, or line of sight. So there you go. So a brief line of sight thing there for you, or summary of the rules for you there. Terrain, height, and line of sight. This obviously there kind of gives you a table example of what the heights of each thing would be. So woods would always be height 5, then the building's height 4 per building level, which you've got to bear in mind. So if you have a building that has multiple levels to it, each level would count as height 4, because later on you will find out that you can move into buildings in this game as cover into like barracks or whatever, or ruins, which is a big part of this game. So it's worth noting those rules now. Hill is height 3, obstacles height 1, such as walls and whatnot, and then rivers and ponds are height 0, so it makes sense. Obstacles, a unit with models and in direct contact with and tracing line of sight over the obstacle of lower height than itself can ignore that obstacle for determining line of sight. Yeah, makes sense. So if you're actually in base contact with that wall with your leader, then you ignore it and you just look straight over it into your opponent, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. Types of terrain. Open terrain is just everything else on the table that's not a type of designated terrain. Blocking terrain, units cannot move across blocking terrain and must go around it. Blocking terrain may impact line of sight depending on its height. Okay. Difficult terrain consists of woods, rocks, and waterways, as well as industrial debris or features such as a pipe network or ruins, blah blah blah. Units cannot sprint through difficult terrain unless it is to make contact with an enemy unit to initiate an assault as part of a charge, which we'll talk about later, but that would count then as a hindered charge. A unit with its leader within difficult terrain will ignore the terrain when determining line of sight to units outside of the terrain if the leader is within 3 inches of the edge of the terrain to the target. Otherwise, difficult terrain affects line of sight, as noted previously. A unit within difficult terrain that is of equal or greater height than it is always in cover. Yep, and a unit must have at least 50% of its own models within the difficult terrain in order to be considered as in cover. This will normally be clear due to the leader and model placement rules, which we'll go over a bit more later as well. Okay, so flipping over now, obstacles. Units can move over obstacles normally as part of an advance action, even ending either side of them. Units may not sprint over obstacles unless it is to make contact with a charge again, but it would be hindered. Obstacles are height 1 and never block line of sight, but may provide cover, as we discussed earlier as well. Hills. A unit's leader model must be positioned with all its base on the hill for the unit to count as being on the hill for cover, etc. If a unit's leader model is on a hill, then the unit ignores the hill when it is checking for line of sight. Otherwise, the height of the hill will impact line of sight as normal. So if you're on top of it looking down off of it, it helps with your height size for seeing enemy units, if you like, for line of sight. Specialised units and terrain. Wheeled units may not cross difficult terrain or obstacles. Tracked units, though, can cross difficult terrain or obstacles as if it were open terrain. Anti-grav units may move over difficult terrain of height 2 or less, and any obstacles with no penalty to movement. They may use the sprint action to move into or through difficult terrain, and any such move that is a charge will not be hindered. They may also disembark more easily from vehicles with the fly keyword. Yes, they can. Walkers may ignore obstacles for movement, and when determining if a charge is hindered, they are still affected by difficult terrain. There you go. Units, typically vehicles that can fly, just move freely over these things, but may not be placed on top of blocking terrain, essentially. Buildings as terrain. They not only obstruct line of sight for units, but you can't move through them, essentially. But you can end your movement with your leader touching base to base with a building to enter it, which we'll go more into later. And this is where you go on to how your activations work and whatnot. You obviously have your activation markers, fairly simple. We've already said you get 2 actions, and you can do short actions or long actions. Long actions count as 2 actions, of course. So you can shoot or blaze away as a short action. You can advance as a short action. You can hit the dirt as a short action to take cover, or you can sprint as a long action, which you can also then turn into a charge, which we'll go through in a moment. We're going to skip these summaries here, I think, and just go straight into the more detailed parts. Free actions, of course, do not count towards short or long action limits, so you can use free actions as you will. Movement. Coherency, you always have to be within 3 inches of the leader model, unless you have more than 10 models in the thing, in which case it goes up to 6 inches of within 6 inches of your leader. If you go outside of coherency of your, if any of the models in your unit go outside of coherency, the first action you have to make in your turn is to move within coherency again as part of your first action. So there you go, which is fairly as it is for most games, but as with Star Wars Legion, that sort of thing, it's all based around your leader once again. Moving units, fairly simple. You measure from your leader, you move them that distance within the ruler. You can pre-measure in this game, as already discussed, and then you just place your models around your leader within coherency, very similar to that of Star Wars Legion, etc. I think it works nicely. It's much easier as well. You don't have to measure from every single model. Much smoother, quicker to do. And I completely agree with that style of movement. I think that's kind of the more modern thing to go with nowadays that they tend to do. Moving units onto the table from reserves is basically very similar to normal movement. You can also charge from off the table as well if you wish to. Pretty nice. Moving units off the table, you have to end with your base of your leader model in contact with the edge of the table, and then you can remove the whole unit, essentially. So some scenarios might ask that you have to get friendly units, a certain number of friendly units to win the scenario off the end of your opponent's table edge or something. All your leader needs to do is be in base contact with the edge of the table, and the whole unit gets taken off. Interpretation of units. This is to make it clear. So you're not supposed to end movement unless you're charging within 1 inch of enemy units, but also in Firefight you're not supposed to end within your movement within 1 inch of friendly units either, which is interesting, and that's just to distinguish squads, essentially, and which units are in which squads. So you do have to kind of move around things, although there are some cases where you can move through units but you have to end your movement outside of 1 inch from friendly units. So in this case here, it says, unless initiating an assault, you can move through friendly units so long as you end your unit's move at least 1 inch or more away from the other friendly unit. So there you go. Ranged attacks. We've already gone into a bit here to do with this with line of sight. However, you measure line of sight from your and check your weapon range. So if the weapon range of your leader is 13 inches, like in this example, or for example your weapon range is 12 inches, they would be out of range there from the leader, and nobody in your unit would be able to shoot because it's your leader ordering the rest of your unit to shoot. However, if your leader had a 15-inch range weapon, you're within 13 inches of the closest enemy model, you have clear line of sight, you can order your unit to shoot, and anybody then in your unit that has enough range to within that range that's been measured, not from those specific other models, but from your leader once again, any model that has 15-inch or more range on their stat profile for their weapons can also shoot alongside him, and you just pool all the dice together then to make the shots. And that's pretty much it for that. Obviously, if you have different coloured dice for different weapons in the unit, because different units will have different armour piercing values, much like your 40k and that sort of thing, it's best to do that. Otherwise, you want to roll dice separately for the different weapon types. Otherwise, try and do it all in one roll if you can, is what it's saying. Rolling to hit and rolling to damage are what you do in this game, so almost like hit and wound. And these are your modifiers. Rolls of a 1 are always a fail, rolls of an 8 are always a critical hit and a success, no matter what. So modifiers excluded, it doesn't matter. If you roll a 1 or an 8, it's always a fail or a hit. But then modifiers do apply for target being in cover, it's -1. If the target is classed as a small unit keyword, it's -1. Target a vehicle with the fly keyword, it's -1 because they're moving too fast. And if a unit has the stealth keyword, it's also -1 to hit them as well. You can still re-roll ones though if you want to, that's important to note, but you just can't modify them. And you can't put negative modifiers to 8 either, as we've said. You take all of the hits, so if you're rolling on a 4+, and you're rolling say 6 dice, you get 3 hits. You then roll 3 dice to damage, and again you use the obviously when you're rolling to hit, you use your shooting modifier, your shooting stat here, SH. You then take a look at the armor value of the opposing unit you're shooting at, and you have to beat that armor value. If you have AP on the weapon you're using, you reduce that armor value by the amount. So if you have AP -2, then that armor value of 6 might become 4. And then you just need 4+ on those 3 dice, see what you get. Whatever damage you cause, it then goes through. Very, very simple. And essentially the way damage works with shooting in this, you take off the models in line of sight first, and then your leader's always the last model in the unit to go down, even if they're the last model in line of sight. You can then start taking off models outside of line of sight, as opposed to your leader. And if there are models in your unit with multiple wound value, so if each model in your unit's worth 2 wounds, then you just put the damage next to the unit. You don't have to put it on a specific model, and then you just, if the next turn you take another damage, you just remove another model, essentially. You don't have to assign it to specific models, which is fine, I think. And that's how you're removing your casualties there, as it said. And as it says there, the leader must always be the last model to be removed. Blaze Away, this is another type of shoot action, mostly used, I think, as far as I'm aware, for Overwatch, which is a thing in this game as well, or something very similar. You can choose to Blaze Away rather than a standard shoot action though, because it does give you some bonuses in a way. And each weapon increases its shoot dice by 1. So if you have 1 die per weapon in your unit, if you choose to Blaze Away, you get 2 instead. But you can only do this with weapons that have the Blaze Away keyword. Follow the standard steps for line of sight range exactly as you usually would. Damage and casualties are resolved as normal. If at least 1 hit is scored, the target unit will gain a pin marker though when blazing away, which is different. This goes through types of cover here. We've already discussed that if you're partially blocked, you're classed as in cover. There's different types of cover here. Big targets cannot gain cover, and if you basically are at least 3 height value over the height of the terrain you're behind or inside of, then you don't gain from cover because you're too big to be classed as in that cover, essentially. So there you go. Going on to assault, so this is like your charging. So assault, this is very simple. You can either make an advance move or a sprint move, so double movement for a long move. If you advance and get into base contact with your leader, you can then move with the opposing unit that you want to move into combat with. You can then move the rest of your unit to within base contact or within 1 inch of enemy models. And they can also fight alongside your leader for a second action. If you wish to sprint and you lock in with your leader and the rest of your unit, that can be then classed as a charge. And then you get charge bonuses essentially. However, some things will class your unit as having a hindered charge, such as these here. So the charging unit does not have line of sight to the target, the target unit before it moves. Line of sight is blocked. So you can still do these things, but your charge would then be classed as hindered. The charge movement from leader to the target is not a straight line. Example, the leader had to run around another unit or terrain feature to get to that opposing unit, because you are meant to measure the closest you can between your leader's base and the closest enemy model in the enemy unit for the charge, and you have to make a straight charge, as straight as you can do. The charge movement from leader to target travels through or over any difficult terrain or obstacles, or engages an enemy unit across an obstacle it is in contact with, or that is within a building, such as what's happening here. You're charging to the other side of a wall, so the charge movement originated within a building, transport vehicle, or from an area off table, such as arriving from reserves, because you can charge out of reserve or vehicle, except transport vehicle if you wish to, but that's still classed as hindered. Units performing a hindered charge will still fight before their opponent, but will not get the +1 to hit modifiers mentioned above. Yeah, so you get certain bonuses when you actually class as charging, essentially, which is pretty cool. So yeah, when a charging unit will benefit from a +1 to hit modifier in the subsequent assault and will fight before the enemy unit. So essentially, when you're in assault with an opposing unit, both sides get to actually fight simultaneously, but if you charge your opponent, then you get to fight before them, and they might lose models before they get to fight back, which is pretty cool. And you also get a +1 to hit. So charging, if you can pull it off, is much more beneficial than just advancing into combat and then attacking, or assaulting, should I say. Assault reactions, so before you have to declare a charge or an assault that you're performing one, and before you actually make that assault, you can react as the target unit, essentially. You can choose to do suppressive fire. A unit with at least one weapon with blaze away, the blaze away keyword, may perform a suppressive fire assault reaction, and any models in the unit with the blaze away special rule can make ranged attacks as normal as per the blaze away rules that we've been through previously. So you're basically only hitting on 8, I think it was, wasn't it? Line of sight to the assaulting unit is always considered to be clear when reacting with the blaze away, essentially. Assuming that models are left in the charging unit to come for you, then they can charge as normal, but you do count damage caused in this section of the assault reactions towards the entire assault and who wins the assault, so that's quite cool. Evading, you basically get to move directly away in a straight line, and you measure that straight line through your the opposing leader, straight through your leader in a straight line, and you have to move straight backwards in that direction. If after evading you don't get away and the assaulting unit still has the range to tangle you up, basically, then you get to they get to move forward and still entangle with you and fight you, essentially. You do have to pass a nerve test though with the unit that wants to evade to actually get away, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. Which we do go through more later how to pull that off. But usually a unit has a specific value for nerve. You just have to roll equal to or more than that nerve test to actually be successful and be able to advance in a straight line away from your opponent. Controlled fire, and bear in mind, guys, you have to have these keywords as part of that unit that's reacting to be able to choose any of these specific assault reactions. So you don't just get to choose any of these that you want to. You have to actually have these keywords as part of that unit's stat line. But controlled fire is an option sometimes. As an assault reaction, a unit with a controlled fire keyword performs a shoot action with a -1 modifier to hit, counting line of sight and as clear and ignoring any cover. After the shoot action is resolved, more survivors from the assaulting unit into contact. Damage caused by controlled fire will count towards the shooting unit's assault resolution in the subsequent assault. Special rules that apply modifiers to shoot actions, such as stealthy, still apply to this assault reaction, so but worth bearing that in mind. And a countercharge essentially means a unit with the countercharge keyword making this reaction is not moved but fights simultaneously with the unit that is initiating the assault. So if it charged or before the attacking unit if the assault was initiated as part of an advance action. The counter-charging unit will not gain a +1 hit for charging, though, like your opponent will. So all it does is basically means that you can fight at the same time as your opponent, even if they charged you. But they'll still get their +1 modifier, you won't. But it's still really nice, I think, and I like the idea that you can actually counter-charge in this. It evens things out a bit if you are like a combat-based unit. Coming out of the that there you have failed assaults. Obviously here, as it says, should a unit trying to assault be unable to move its lead into base contact with its target because of an evade assault reaction or something, you will have failed. Instead, move the assaulting unit an advance move towards the target as far as possible, but remaining outside of 1 inch from all units as normal. The unit that failed the assault is then marked as activated as well, which really hurts, to be honest. Moving directly away, we've already discussed this here. This kind of goes into more detail about if you're moving around terrain, etc. You have to stop away, you have to stop going through enemy or friendly units when moving directly away. Not going to go too much into detail there, but there are specifics to that. So obviously, we'll go through the steps that you actually take during an assault, but it's fairly simple. If you charged, you get to fight first, and you roll all of your attacks combined. You roll to hit, roll to damage. Very, very similar to your shooting attacks. Apply AP of weapons, etc. And then you remove casualties. If you're fighting at the same time, you both allocate damage at the same time, and then you work it out, essentially return fight, that kind of thing. And then you work out the resolution. Obviously, if you're charging and you get to fight first and enemy models go down, they'll have less models to fight with. It's very simple, standard mechanics for combat in most games, except for you both get to fight at the same time a lot of the time. Assault resolutions, so you add up the amount of damage caused on either side. Whoever wins, you get benefits. If you lose, you don't, for sure. You have to run away. So as the loser of a combat or an assault, if one unit has been destroyed with all its models removed as casualties, it has automatically lost the assault. Assuming it has models remaining, the losing unit is in an assault is marked as activated. So you get activated, which is nasty, and you gain a pin marker as well. And you must remove its hit the dirt marker if it has one as well. In addition, it must then withdraw 6 inches directly away from the winning unit, remaining 1 inches away from enemy units, and leave any terrain or building it was within if able. In a draw, both units have to move 3 inches directly away from each other and determine the direction of travel for both, and then move the defending unit first. Both units are then marked as activated and both gain a pin marker. So a draw is really not good for either side. You really want to be winning if you can. The winning unit is an assault. The winning unit may make an assault. May make a 3-inch consolidation move in any direction, which is nice. Remaining 1 inch from enemy units. The consolidation move may not be into a transport vehicle or building, and may not be into other terrain. The winning unit may immediately remove a pin marker if it has one, which is really nice. If the losing unit was occupying terrain, the winner may move to occupy the same terrain feature as part of a consolidation move, though. If the leader can actually reach it, which I think is really cool. Trapped is a big part of this as well. Any unit required to move directly away after an assault for any reason that cannot get further than 1 inch from enemy units is destroyed and removed from the table. So if you trap them in, you can remove them easier, which is really a real tactical thing. You can actually surround enemy units to get rid of them, which I find really, really cool. But it makes complete sense. And this even counts in the case of a draw, it's saying here as well. One thing I'm actually going to move back to here, guys, is just to quickly explain the advanced short and the sprint. So the advanced short, you just move up to your first speed stat, which I'd already explained earlier. So if you have 6-12, you move 6 inches. With the sprint, it's a long move, but you can use that as a charge. You move the second stat line on it. You can also use an action to hit the dirt, which I missed and we didn't go through. My apologies. I thought it was explained in more detail. So you can choose to hit the dirt to gain what cover they can from their surroundings. If they do, this will count as being in cover. until the next unit activates. Until the unit next activates, no additional benefit is gained from also being in terrain that provides cover. The unit is marked with a HTD marker. Units may hit the dirt as a free action when being pinned if the owning player wishes, so that's also an option as well. Moving back on, we go to pinning and how that works. So the battlefield is a dangerous place and many soldiers will want to keep their heads down to protect themselves, reducing their combat effectiveness. We call this being pinned. Unit will be pinned and receive a pin marker in the following situations. For all units, this doesn't matter who you are. It loses an assault, you get a pin marker. If in response to some keywords for orders, you might be pinned by an enemy unit. For non-vehicles, such as infantry, if it draws an assault, you also get a pin marker. If it is hit as part of a shoot action by a weapon with the pinning keyword, you get one. It is a unit emerging from a destroyed transport vehicle, so you're jumping out of destroyed transport, you get one. It is hit as part of a blaze away action, you also get a pin marker. For vehicles, if it suffers one or more damage from a weapon with the anti-tank keyword, you get a pin marker. So vehicles can also get pin markers. If it has the fly keyword and suffers one or more damage from a weapon with an anti-aircraft keyword, you also get one. You can only have a single pin marker on you at a time. And if you do receive a pin marker at any time, you can automatically hit the dirt for free. It's also worth noting here that a pin unit will suffer a -1 modifier to its hit rolls in an assault and also to any nerve tests it makes, which we'll go through in a moment. Units that begin their activation pin must spend a short action to remove the pin marker as their first action when they activate. Pin markers may also be removed from spending command points in the end phase, as we discussed at the start, or by some orders or keywords that allow you to do it. Nice stuff. Moving on, nice bit of photography there as well. Nerve tests, here we go, very simple stuff. A unit may also need to test for nerve in response to certain keywords, orders, or psychic attacks, which are a separate thing. The effect of this will be explained in the appropriate section. How to test for nerve, very simple. Make a roll based on with a d8, based on your nerve stat line. So if your nerve stat line is 4+, then you apply these modifiers. You need to try and get the result that you need. Natural rolls of a 1 are always a fail, no matter, again, modifiers excluded. And a natural roll of an 8 is always a success, no matter what. So modifiers, the unit is pinned, it's -1 to your nerve test. The unit is now the single remaining model from a troop or specialist unit. So if you're the last man standing, you have -2 to your nerve test, which is brutal. +1 though if a unit is in a building, so a building can help buff your nerve test. It makes you feel hardier and more protected to stay in the fight, I suppose. Broken units though, if you fail a nerve test, then you become broken. Also, if a result equals or exceeds the nerve value of the unit you pass, however, the unit suffers no further effect, although the unit will keep its pin marker if you did have one, worth pointing out. Broken units though, taking heavy casualties can lead to running away essentially, or dying. So to represent the effect of such attrition, units will have less than the 50% of their original model count are said to be broken. Broken units will need to make a nerve test in each subsequent end phase. You can use a broken marker as a reminder, so that's how you know if you need to take one or not. And you keep having to take one every turn at the end of every round then, if you're still broken. In the end phase, if the nerve for the broken unit test is failed, the unit is destroyed and removed from the game as well. So brutal stuff. So you basically run off the table essentially. In the end phase, if the nerve for the broken unit test is failed, the unit is destroyed and removed from the game. Note that it is possible for a unit to lose its broken status, for example, as a result of recovering previously removed models due to the medic or regenerate keywords. There you go. Command units have Iron Will automatically and they can never be broken. Psychic abilities, these are very similar to, you don't need line of sight for them though, so they're similar to shooting attacks, but you don't need line of sight. They will have a certain range to pull them off. However, you can target models inside buildings and enemy transports, as opposed to shooting you can't. Worth pointing out that a lot of these things you can't do, but with psychic powers you can, because you're just entering their minds, right? Other than that, very similar to shooting in some ways. Some you might not even have to necessarily roll for, they have different effects. That's pretty much all you need to know about psychic powers. They're very much based on specific powers, and they're explained how you do them really on a model's specific profile. And if the attacks are not modified by the target being in cover either or having the stealthy keyword, is probably worth pointing out. It's also worth pointing out that you can use 2 different psychic abilities on the fighter as 2 different actions if there are 2 different ones. Reserves we've sort of already been through in the rule set here. You don't get to choose to just choose reserves for any game you play. It will be scenario specific, so, and that will probably explain more how to use them, to be honest. But otherwise, we've already kind of been through how they sort of work, so we'll kind of skip that one for now. Buildings are quite in depth. I'm not going to go too in depth with them. However, the way they essentially work, if you end your leader's move within base contact of any part of the building that you wish to enter, you can then enter the building. If you're inside a building, you're just classed as being inside it with the whole unit. You don't have a specific spot within it, so your opponent, if they wish to charge you in a building, just have to end with their leader being in base contact with that building, and they get to attack you. Essentially, if you then charge a unit in a building, your charge is hindered. However, if the unit inside the building fails the assault, they have to be placed within 6 inches away from the building, and then your actual unit that assaulted them can then occupy the building if you wish to. So pretty awesome. I really like this mechanic being added into this sort of game because it gives buildings more of a reason to be on the battlefield and more of a tactical advantage to you. I really like this. Also with shooting, it's assumed that all buildings have suitable windows to shoot out of. And into essentially as well, but they provide cover. When shooting at a unit within a building, determine line of sight and measure range to the building itself and not the unit within, so we've already kind of explained that. You cannot enter and exit a building in the same turn as well, should probably point that out. Something worth pointing into there. If you have really large buildings, you can also designate a building as being separate buildings within one large building, so you have to make moves into each separate section of the building, and you can do multiple assaults and things like that. So if there's a unit in one part of a large building and another one in another part of it, you have to still move through the building to actually take each one. So you can almost kind of do interior battles within Firefight. It's worth pointing out, but gets a little more complicated, but it's worth reading through those if you do want to do something like that. So that is an option. Building roofs are interesting. If you fly or have the anti-grav keyword, you can actually just jump straight on top of a roof. Otherwise, if you're a normal unit on foot, you have to move into the building and then up, measuring upwards. So if it's height 4 building, you have to use that movement to get up to the roof through the bottom of the building. Also, if you're a flyer or anti-grav unit and you fly on top of the building, you can then assault through the roof down into the building on top into the unit below. Moving on to vehicles, pretty similar for most vehicles here, but obviously we've already explained vehicles and pinning and whatnot. Vehicles and buildings, unless you're a flyer or an anti-grav, you can't have anything to do with the building, but if you're a flyer or an anti-grav, you can get onto a building roof zone but not inside one. Vehicles and shooting, you measure from the hull for line of sight. Never measure from weapons in this game is just the thing worth pointing out probably. Vehicles may engage in assault but may not assault units inside buildings, which we've already kind of touched on. Vehicles losing an assault will receive a pin marker but are not marked as activated unless they are the attacking unit that initiated the assault, so a bit different in that respect. Vehicles that lose an assault and cannot move directly away are only destroyed if the winning unit is either a vehicle or has a ranged assault weapon with the anti-tank keyword, which makes sense. Otherwise, they are marked as both pinned and activated. Nasty. Otherwise, destroyed vehicles, you're encouraged to kind of leave the carcass and maybe some smoke on them, but otherwise they don't class as actually being intervening terrain after they're destroyed. There's no exploding or anything in this. Flying vehicles always have to make a minimum 6-inch move at the start of their activation from their starting point, otherwise they are destroyed and removed from the game, so pretty brutal. Vehicles with the fly keyword may not initiate an assault and may not be attacked in assault unless the opponent has anti-grav or the fly keyword. Shoot actions against vehicles have -1 unless you have the anti-aircraft keyword. Vehicles with the fly keyword do not block line of sight to other units as your class as being in the sky, of course, which makes sense. You can also not have your base touching an objective with a flying vehicle. because their bases are too big. Transport vehicles. These are quite interesting. So the capacity for transport vehicles, you actually start your unit inside a transport vehicle during deployment, and you deploy them separately, but you just claim that they're inside that transport vehicle. Essentially, they're starting the game inside of it. So you have a certain capacity for the vehicle. If you have a capacity of 10 models, you can hold a single model of height 2 or less for each point of capacity. For each 2 points of capacity, they may hold a single model of height 3 or more as well. And then anything bigger than that is generally considered as bulky or vehicle keywords, which can't be put inside transport vehicles. You can put 2 units inside transport vehicles if you have enough space or capacity, essentially, which makes sense. Both transport vehicles and the units inside activate separately, as said before. You can't interact with terrain, objectives, or shoot from inside vehicles. You have to get out of them first, but you can charge out of vehicles, and you can advance or sprint out of them if you wish to, which is pretty awesome. I think that's a smooth way of doing things. I like it. Entering and exiting transport vehicles. Your transport vehicles can move before you exit them, perfectly fine. And this is why I said it's nice to be able to use these command points and whatnot, or faction points, to be able to dual activate, if you like, which I think works really nicely for transport units. Exiting a flying transport vehicle, this can be a bit more deadly for vehicles that have the for units that have the fly or anti-grav keyword. They can exit fairly normally, and you just place them within a certain distance. So yes, you can also exit from a flying vehicle with a non-anti-grav or fly units, but they have to be in base-to-base contact with their leader of the transport vehicle, the flying vehicle. But they also count as activated for that turn, so it's a much bigger deal if you drop out of a flying, which makes sense, right? Like, you ain't gonna be able to do much after jumping out of a fast flying vehicle, jumping down to the ground. If you're jumping out of a destroyed transport, you gain a pin marker and are marked as activated as well, which makes sense. If you don't have the fly or anti-grav keywords, and you're jumping out of a destroyed flying vehicle, you are destroyed, which is pretty brutal. Drones, you can add to a unit as part of the capacity as an upgrade, possibly, or they just get included with them. They count as being as part of that unit, but do not have an individual profile, but do count as a model within the unit for all rules such as coherency, building or vehicle capacity, line of sight, assault, etc. But drones do not count as a model for determining casualties or to determine when a unit is broken. So that's kind of what drones do for you. Certain things such as snipers keywords, though, can choose to target a drone specifically if they wish to in an enemy unit. And this is where you come into all your keywords. I'm not going to go through these guys. If you wish to take a look, I'm sure you will do. These are the specific keywords for special weapons and abilities and things in the game. If you wish to take a look through this specifically, you can do, but I'm not going to go through them here. And this is a reference table here for the assault reactions that we went through earlier. There's so many different keywords, it's pointless me going through all of them. We'd be here for another hour. So if you wish to take a look at them individually, please do. You come onto the missions here. I want to say there's at least 8 or 10 missions for match play and narrative play. However, one disappointing side I will say, at least at the moment, that they may have plans in the future to do so, but there's no campaign playthrough rule set in Firefight right now that I know of. At least not in these books anyway. There are narrative missions that you can play, so you could devise your own narrative campaign if you wish to, with story and whatever, but there's no, like, deaths, injury table, leveling up experience based thing within this. So that's one downside. However, they do give you some nice narrative play missions and match play missions to play through, which is fair enough, and there's a good choice to go through here. There's 2 different types of missions you can play. Battle missions are the more competitive, like I said, match play, or narrative, more story-driven games. You decide on your game size. We've already discussed this earlier. Choose your strike force. The faction list book breaks down more how to build a list, which, like I say, if you guys want to check that out, let me know in the comments. We'll go through that book as well. Determining the mission, placing terrain. It suggests here that on a 4x4 table, you would have 5 pieces of terrain, roughly 6 by 6 inches each, and up to 5 smaller linear obstacles or smaller items on the table as well. And then you'd want maybe double that or something for, or close to double that on a bigger table. It essentially says you want to place a single piece of terrain approximately 6 by 6 inches in area within 12-inch square of each area of the table, plus one additional piece of terrain. So there you go. Mission descriptions, you have the terrain setup specific for certain scenarios. Deployment, you always deploy wholly within the deployment zone except for reserves. The game length, it will tell you the number of rounds per mission. There's not a specific set thing for every mission, it's mission specific. And then there may be special rules depending on the narrative missions or whatnot that you're playing. So going into each game, you have a recon roll. You roll your command dice, essentially. So you have each player rolls a number of command dice equal to those provided by command units in their strike force, and compare the total scores, re-roll in the case of a draw. Command dice coming from any other unit in your strike force do not count towards this roll. It's just the amount that your command unit gives you. The player with the highest score is the winner and may choose to have the initiative to give it to their opponents. You can actually choose, which I think is nice. The player with the initiative then chooses which board edge and deployment zone to take as theirs. The player with the initiative then deploys their entire strike force onto the table first and will take the first turn in round 1. Deploying units, very simple. You deploy wholly within the deployment zone that is given to you. Fairly simple as per most. Also worth pointing out that in Firefight, if you're the first player to finish activating units in a round, you then get priority in the following round as well. So that's how priority works essentially. Unit strength, we kind of touched on this earlier, so some missions will only be achievable, so this is moving on to objectives, if the right sort of troops are occupying the mission objectives. So unit strength is a way to determine the presence and tactical ability of a unit to accomplish this, and each unit has a unit strength stated in its unit profile. Last one standing, if a troop unit specialist unit is reduced to a single model, it will have a unit strength of 0. This does not apply to support or command units. And if you have a value of 0, then you're probably less likely to achieve an objective. To claim objectives, you must have at least one model in base contact with an objective on the battlefield, and your leader always has to be within 3 inches of the objective as well. And then unit strength then counts towards it. An objective will be claimed by the player with the most combined unit strength of all the units eligible to claim the objective. Neither side can claim in case of a tied score. So then whichever unit has the highest US then essentially. A unit may still claim a single objective at a time if it is eligible to claim more. So you can only ever claim one objective even if you have the ability to claim 2 different ones, so you choose which one you wish to occupy. Some objectives will differ with mission-specific rules, of course. These are all of kind of your missions available. I'm not going to specifically go through each one, but there are many to choose from. You got meeting engagement, occupation, these are your deployment types here. These are all the battle missions, so the match play. Control the intel, refuse flank, take and hold, last stand, secure the sector, stop the signal. Narrative missions, these is good amount, as I said, of each, and then these have got special rules per game. Seismic shift, lab raid, take back the city, evacuate, lots of choice here. Hearts and minds, fighting withdrawal, weapons testing, and data retrieval. I think that's 8 missions. Some lovely art. You move on to the end of the book here, guys, and there's at least another, I would say, 15 to 20 pages here now, 10 to 15, 20 pages of fluff if you want to know more about the Firefight lore. That's more or less it, guys, for the book. That is your Firefight rule book flick through. Obviously, I've gone through that as quick as I kind of can. I may have missed things or whatnot, so if you have any questions, guys, please do ask in the comments below and I can have a look through the book to answer those for you. But as always, keep it here for everything Firefight at Wargaming Luke. Make sure to check out Boarding Brum for all your pre-orders for things like Firefight and all your hobbying needs for Wargames, of course. But as always, guys, until next time, happy Wargaming.